Disinterested. So as usual, let's split the word into parts to make sense of what this word is. Do note that the definitions that will be used are from Oxford Dictionary and Google. Interest is the feeling that accompanies or causes special attention to something or someone. Adding the suffix ed to it makes it an adjective that means showing curiosity or concern about something or someone. That is, having a feeling of interest. Adding the prefix "dis" to it feels like the meaning has been made negative, reversing it. Oxford Dictionary defines it as having or feeling no interest in something. Adding "ness" to it feels like it is a state of being disinterested, or disinterested as for philosophy, the essence of being disinterested. So that's it. No, not really. Really, I thought that this would be a successful intro because, in actuality, when you look it up on the Oxford Dictionary in Google, or even in Merriam-Webster, I checked it. I really did. They have it. It says there that disinterested is the quality or state of being objective or impartial. I really thought that we're going to take the hard way in debunking the meaning of this word, because really, even I thought at first that disinterested means like the state where you lack interest. Though we already know when we're given such a word and we're talking about aesthetics, critical perspectives in arts, philosophy, and we're tasked to determine the definition of the word, of course we would immediately assume that no, it's not what you think. It would have a very different meaning outside of the technical aspect of the word. When we're talking about aesthetics judgment, when you're going to look it up, you'd immediately see Kant. Let's talk about Kant first. Immanuel Kant is a German philosopher of the 18th century. His work started so much changes in ethics, metaphysics, epistemology, politics, and especially aesthetics. Most people say that Kant is the greatest philosopher ever since the Greek period. He has influenced centuries of time. Even some philosophers of today are what they call as conscience. A peer-reviewed academic resource said that Kant believes he can show that aesthetic judgment is not fundamentally different from ordinary theoretical cognition of nature, and he believes he can show that aesthetic judgment has a deep similarity to moral judgment. Well, the beautiful and ugly were already part of our lives from the very moment we extracted knowledge or any form of language and be able to use that for us to interpret the real world. Even babies who do not know how to speak, as long as they develop the senses, they build up judgment that we usually cannot understand. But we can observe, we can sense that they do have the ability to judge. Ang halimbawa nito, ginagamit natin ang mga katagang nangingilala para sa mga batang madikit sa magulang, kunwari sa nanay. Sa nanay na sanay ang bata, kapag ito hiniram ng kumare, may mga instances na ayaw nito sumama, hence nangingilala. And from that, we can say na, we can sense that merong ability mag-judge ang kahit sanggol or bata. Okay, so back to the judgment of taste. Kant divided this into two conditions for a judgment to be considered a judgment of taste: subjectivity and universality. It is ever so necessary that a judgment of taste is subjective. It needs to be based on a feeling of pleasure, satisfaction, or displeasure, dissatisfaction. But in order to know what is special in the pleasure on what we perceive as beautiful, universality is at most important. Kant implied that if someone said that something is beautiful, then he expects the very same satisfaction of others. He judges not merely for himself, but for everyone, and speaks of beauty as if it were a property of things. Hence he says that the thing is beautiful, and does not count on the agreement of others with his judgment of satisfaction because he has frequently found them to the agreeable with his own, but rather demands it from them. He rebukes them if they judge otherwise, and denies that they have taste, for he nevertheless required that they ought to have it, and to this extent one cannot say, everyone has his special taste. This would be as much as to say that there is no taste at all, no aesthetic judgment that could make a rightful claim to the assent of everyone. We can think of the judgment of taste as a varying midpoint from some open interval between judgment of beauty and empirical judgment about the external world. These judgments of taste are judgment with which possess universal rationality or plausibility, but they are far from what referred to as universal facts or universal truths, because we're talking about subjective judgments. However, This becomes problematic in some sense. So an idea is being used in the discourse of subjective universality, which is the judgment of taste referred to as the disinterestedness.
Dissatisfaction, which determines the judgment of taste, is disinterested.
This is Adam Sullivan of Youngstown State University. He talks about aesthetics, contemporary art, and the philosophy of art.
Aesthetic disinterest is probably the idea most commonly associated with the critique of judgment. When you say Kantian aesthetics, disinterest is probably the first thing that comes to someone's mind when they hear you say Kantian aesthetics. When we say that a judgment of taste must be disinterested, we mean that it must be impartial. Disinterest doesn't mean boredom. I know that it might sound like it means something like boredom, but it doesn't. So think of disinterest and interest in the sense that we mean it when we talk about someone having a vested interest.
He has this in his YouTube channel named Aesthetics Talk. He has a playlist named Aesthetics Talk, Episode 1, Kantian Aesthetics. We can think of a vested interest as something with involvement in an undertaking of affairs, especially those with an expectation of financial gain, though not necessarily with financial gain but usually. Halimbawa, nilagyan ng crushed dolomite rocks ang Manila Bay para masabing may white sands dito. Kahit na alam mo naman na hindi worth it ang halos 389 million pesos, lalo na ang layunin to ay short term lamang para pagandahin, tapos wala naman talagang benepisyo kundi maganda lang, o diba art? Anyway, ayun, alam mo na, walang benepisyo kundi pagandahin lang, tapos mawawala rin naman kasi maanod. It can pose public health at risk due to exposure of fine dolomite dust that may lead to chronic health effects. Hindi naman talaga nasusolusyonan ang polusyon sa Manila Bay kundi pinagtatakpan lang ang problema. Pero dahil DDS ka, sang-ayon ka dahil naniniwala kang the best and the brightest ang administrasyon at baka isa ka na rin bayarang troll sa internet. Kaya pipilitin mo pa rin baliktarin ang sitwasyon kahit na magmumukha kang tanga sa sasabihin mo. Ang sasabihin mo pa rin, ayaw sa white sands, gusto yata, kasurang nakalagay doon. Wow, vested interest. Okay, tama na. Let's go back to Kant. The German word Interesse has a very different meaning than the usual interest in English. Interesse means a kind of pleasure that doesn't have to do with desire, meaning desire didn't cause that pleasure. Halimbawa, pasensya pala tinatagalog ko ang mga halimbawa. Feeling ko kasi it's best in Tagalog. Okay, never mind. Halimbawa, mag-jowa tayo, tapos first week sa rin natin. Naisipan kong i-drawing yung mukha mo, pero di naman talaga ako magaling. Tapos, nung pinakita ko sa'yo yung drawing ko, boom! Mukhang half Filipino, half kabayo. Pero dahil in love ka sa akin, kikiligin ka. Sasabihin mo, thank you so much, I love you. Na kung sa messenger ito, meron pang humigit kumulang sa 10 heart emojing iba't ibang kulay. Kung tutusin, hindi ko alam kung nagandahan ka ba talaga sa ginawa ko or nadala ka ng emosyon, but one thing that I can be sure about is you are already predisposed to like the drawing because of who drew it. I drew it. Your judgment is not based on the drawing itself. So we say that this is not a disinterested judgment. Kung siguro makakita ka ng ibang tao na binigyan ng drawing ng kanilang jowa, tapos hindi naman maganda, sa sobrang kabiteran mo na parang pinagkaitan ka ng pagmamahal sa mundo, ang sasabihin mo, si ate, OA ang pangit naman. Adam Sullivan has an example that is very intriguing to me. He said that a grandmother's grandchild has a drawing, and since she loves this child, she'll say that it is a beautiful drawing, so it ends up hanged on the refrigerator. If other people drew it with similar quality, it would not end up in the grandmother's refrigerator, right? So, Sullivan extended this example. What if a prestigious artist, with which he described as an avant-garde abstract artist whose works consist of childlike drawings on pieces of paper that sells for millions and millions on the art market? So a collector purchased an art for millions of dollars, but he ended up receiving by mistake the work of the grandmother's grandchild. Well, he didn't know what he received is a mistake because he himself cannot tell the difference, and also because who can really tell the difference, right? What do we expect the collector to say? So we can expect that he'd say that it's a beautiful drawing, yes, because of course of the name of the prestigious artist and the millions of money cost him. But think of it like, if he's liking the drawing, but he didn't know that he received a child's drawing, does this mean that he's liking the child's drawing? And therefore, is this a disinterested judgment? This would be a good topic to argue about. Unfortunately, I cannot argue about this now because it really boggles my mind at the moment. I don't know what to say. I really don't know if it is a disinterested judgment or not. Oh hi, it has already been 2 days since I recorded my report, but it seems to me that I just thought of something. So, if... Tatagalogin ko na ha. So, ito ngang collector, bumili siya ng artwork dun sa avant-garde na artist na ang quality ng mga drawing ng artist na yun, parang ang nag-drawing talaga ay bata. Pero, ang natanggap niya by mistake ay, di ba, galing sa bata. Hindi naman niya masabi na mali pala ang natanggap niya kasi nga, di ba, ang ina-expect niya talaga yung quality, parang bata ang nag-drawing. So, sa perspective natin, disinterested judgment to kasi ginajudge niya yung artwork ng hindi naman niya alam kung kanino yung artwork na yun. Pero on his perspective, nagagandahan siya dun sa drawing kasi nga dun sa pangalan ng artist, yung perang nagastos niya para mabili yung artwork na yun. So technically, ginajudge niya dahil ang alam niya galing yun dun sa artist na yun. So hindi pa rin to disinterested judgment kasi nga nasa isip niya galing itong artwork na ito dun sa artist. Pero isipin mo, bigyan mo ng artwork na pambata yung collector na yun. Tapos ibenta mo ng million-million din. Di ba hindi? It would not be the same as for kung galing ito dun sa avant-garde na artist. So, hindi ito disinterested judgment. Well, the point is, I think you're now getting a picture of what disinterested judgment is. And I also know that you may be thinking that, so technically, disinterested judgment is just an unbiased judgment. So I looked it up on the internet about this, and it says there that they are synonymous with each other. Disinterested is marked by justice, honest, and freedom of bias. Well, maybe in some sense, yes, but my take on this is that it is much deeper in a sense that we're talking about the pleasure we can extract from something beautiful. However, it is not clear that the pleasure in the beautiful cannot produce desire. This is problematic because what if pleasure can produce desire? Kant admits that we have certain general concerns with beauty that mean that desire may follow from a judgment of beauty, but according to him, such desires do not have their source solely in pleasure in the beautiful things, but so long as those desires are not intrinsic to the pleasure in beauty. This is the doctrine that all pleasure disinterested is undisturbed. An opponent of this would claim that pleasure in beauty can produce desire by itself. It is not clear who is right at this point, but to get my point compact, in the aesthetic judgment or the judgment of taste, Kant argued that the ability of man to make such judgment lies in the shared capability of man. This enables us to rationalize. Again, aesthetic judgment is subjective, but there must be a universal validity in it. This implies that all rational beings must be able to recognize, give assent, and affirm the beauty in something, regardless of subjectivity. But how can something be beautiful on a universal level? And is this really possible? Kant posed that there is pleasure perceivable in every beauty. However, for this judgment to be universally valid, the pleasure must not be grounded on desire. This is what we call disinterestedness. Kant's thesis is uncertain because what if the rational property of a person is damaged? What if it's all wrong? What if the basis of judgment does not come from a rational being but rather on the world itself and the rational being is just an agent of this world? From our perceptions and experiences, it rarely happens that the majority, much more supermajority of the population, agree to the judgment of another. This makes Kant's arguments erroneous yet plausible. Kant's idea was a man is and ought to be capable of preserving the aesthetical good with the idea that real beauty does not satisfy nor produce desire, yet begets pleasure. If something is truly beautiful, it should not cause greed or extreme desire. But sadly, we learn from experiences that when we experience beauty, we desire from this beauty all the more it can give, making the supposed to be disinterested desirable. So that's on my take. Thank you.